Thomas was on the verge of taking his own life, but he failed to shoot his head because his gun was empty. Apparently, Arthur had taken the bullets out. Lizzie was disappointed with Thomas when she saw what Thomas attempted to do. She called Thomas a coward for trying to take his own life. She thought that Thomas didn't care about his family. When Thomas returned to his house, he received a telephone call from a woman. That woman said that she had sent 3 corpses of people who died in the campaign rally. Those 3 people were Barney, Abrama, and Polly Gray. The Shelby family was greatly saddened by the death of Polly Gray. Michael swore to take revenge for the death of his mother, but not on the murder of his mother. Instead, he swore to take revenge on Thomas Shelby. He thought that his mother died because of Thomas's big ambition. 4 years later, Thomas visited a hotel in Miquelon Island in France. He told a receptionist there that he had booked a meeting room for an important meeting that he was going to hold. The receptionist told him to wait. While Thomas was waiting, he just ordered a glass of water. Apparently, for these past 4 years, Thomas had stopped drinking alcohol. Not long after that, a French man called Jean came to that place and approached Thomas. He mocked Thomas because Thomas was only drinking water. Thomas introduced himself to Jean by giving his name card to him, but Jean burnt Thomas's name card right away. Jean said that Thomas was the person who was responsible for making Jean and his group lose their jobs. Jean kept bothering and harassing Thomas that Thomas finally lost his temper. Everybody was surprised when they saw Thomas taking a gun from his pocket. Thomas wasn't afraid to kill anybody who dared to disrespect the Peaky Blinders. After that, Thomas went to the meeting room that he had booked. He met with Michael and his gang in that room. Since Polly Gray died, Thomas and Michael had never seen or talked to each other. However, they both managed to kill everyone who was responsible for the death of Polly Gray. Thomas arranged a meeting with Michael because he wanted to make a deal to Michael. He planned to take advantage of the men who had lost their jobs in Miquelon Island. He wanted to ask them to join his uncut opium business. Those opium would be shipped from Miquelon Island to Boston in the US. Michael and his gang didn't accept Thomas's offer immediately. They said that they needed to give Thomas's business proposal to their leader who lived in the US called Jack Nelson first. Apparently, Jack Nelson was the uncle of Gina Gray. After that, Michael's gang poured and offered a glass of whiskey to Thomas. Thomas refused and said that he didn't drink alcohol anymore. Michael and his gang laughed at Thomas when they heard that. Thomas held back his anger because he didn't want to ruin their business relation. Then, he told Michael and his gang that there was an informant in their group. He said that the man had a bleeding heart tattoo with Maria written in red. Michael and his gang looked at each other in confusion when they heard that. They were surprised that Thomas managed to find out such information. They thought that Thomas had humiliated them. After Thomas left that meeting, he called a policeman at the harbor immediately. He told the policeman that Michael was going to bring opium with him on the ship. Because of the tip-off from Thomas, Michael was caught and taken into custody by the police as soon as he arrived in Boston. Gina went to the prison to tell Michael that her uncle was going to release him soon. After that, Gina returned to her house. Suddenly Thomas showed up in her house. Gina told Thomas that her uncle Jack Nelson had bought an American license for starting a whiskey distillery when Jack traveled to London with the President of the US. It meant that Jack was going to take control of all whiskey businesses in the US. Since Gina despised Thomas, Gina tried to hurt Thomas by saying that her uncle had rejected Thomas's business proposal. Thomas was unbothered by what Gina said. He tried to hurt Gina back by admitting that he was the one who put Michael in the prison. He said that he didn't mind if Jack rejected his business offer. If Jack rejected his business offer, Thomas would sell his opium to the Jews who lived in the East Boston. That East Boston Jews was Alfie Solomon's. If it went ahead, then all Jack's businesses in the US would be lose in the business competition. At night, Thomas received a telephone call from Lizzie. Lizzie told Thomas that their daughter Ruby had a high fever. But Lizzie said that Thomas didn't need to worry because she had called a doctor to check on Ruby. When Lizzie said that Ruby kept muttering Romany words, Thomas was suddenly surprised and mad. He told Lizzie to watch over Ruby. He said that he would come back home that night. Thomas was aware that muttering Romany words was a sign of bad luck. He was afraid if something terrible happened to his family. Before Thomas left for Birmingham, he went to the prison to visit Michael first. Based on the information that he got from the letter of the President of the US and Jack's mistress, Thomas found out that Michael was going to be kept in the prison for a little while longer. Thomas suggested Michael to accept his business offer if Michael wanted to be released from the prison soon. Thomas also said that Michael couldn't trust Gina completely because he found out that Gina, Jack's mistress, the President of the US, and the President's wife were on their way to Liverpool and they planned to leave Michael alone in the prison. The next day, Thomas finally arrived in his house. He was relieved when he saw Ruby was doing better. In spite of Ruby's good health, Thomas still took Ruby to the hospital so the doctor could check on his daughter once again. After the doctor checked on Ruby, he said that Ruby was in good health and there was nothing to be worried about. Lizzie hoped that what the doctor said could make Thomas relieved and Thomas could take a proper rest. But Thomas said that he didn't have time to take a rest. there were some important businesses that he needed to take care of first. Lizzie was tired with Thomas's businesses. She said that it was time for Thomas to take a break from work and go on vacation with his family. Because of Thomas's poor sleep quality, Thomas had a seizure and a hallucination. He kept being haunted by the time when he served in a war in France. Lizzie woke up because of Thomas. She tried to wake Thomas up from his nightmare. After Thomas woke up, Lizzie treated the wounds on Thomas's back. Thomas said that he was alright because he didn't want to make Lizzie worry. He said that his body felt fresh and good since he had stopped drinking alcohol. He promised that he and the Peaky Blinders would take a break from work after he had done his business deal. The next evening, Thomas made a speech in front of 100 people from the Labour Party. He tore a paper which had a writing that said silence on it to show everybody there that they refused to be silenced anymore. He promised to become their representative to bring their concerns to the parliamentarians. After Thomas finished making a speech, a woman called Laura McKee or Captain Swing showed up and approached him. She was the person who captured Michael on the ship before. As the representative of IRA, she came to that place to tell Thomas that her group was responsible for the death of Polly Gray. She attacked Thomas by saying that Thomas began to lose his power and the public thought the same about Thomas. After Thomas heard that, he took some letters from his pocket. He dismissed Laura's thought immediately by presenting her some secret letters from Jack Nelson and a secret letter from the President of the US. Laura was caught completely off guard by those letters. Unlike what she had thought, Thomas hadn't lost any power. Thomas said that Jack and his team would arrive in London in a few days. They came to London to buy a license to import alcohol. Besides that, Jack was also interested in finding information about the political ideology fascism. Because of that, Thomas wanted Laura to work together with him to help Jack Nelson. When Jack arrived in London, Thomas planned to organize a meeting between Jack Nelson and Oswald Mosley. After that, he would send Laura to offer Dublin to Jack. If Jack accepted that offer, Thomas would manage to ship their opium to Boston. Laura was unable to speak when she heard Thomas's plan, but she finally agreed to work together with Thomas. Since Polly Gray died, Ada Shelby was appointed to replace her position in the Shelby Company. Ada met with Thomas to tell him that Arthur had become addicted to opium. She was disappointed with Thomas. She said that she really needed Thomas during this chaotic situation, but Thomas was only thinking about his business and putting himself in danger. After that, Thomas visited Alfie Solomons in his hiding place. He wanted to make a business deal with Alfie. He planned to sell 5 tons of uncut opium which had been stored in a warehouse in Liverpool. Alfie accepted Thomas's business offer immediately. He asked how much Thomas wanted him to pay. Gina visited Michael in the prison. She wanted to say goodbye to Michael. She told Michael that her uncle was going to release him from the prison soon. She also said that her uncle had promised to help Michael to kill Thomas with his own hands. At night, Thomas and Lizzie attended a meeting which was held by the fascists. As Thomas had promised before, he was going to become the representative of the people to bring their concerns in that meeting. Not long after that, Arthur came to that meeting and made a scene there. Under the effect of the opium he had been consumed, he ranted and raved in front of Thomas and everybody there. Thomas tried to calm Arthur down by giving him a letter from Linda. In that letter, Linda said that she might forgive Arthur for what he had done. Thomas said that Arthur needed to change if he really wanted to get back together with Linda. In that meeting, Thomas met Mosley and his new girlfriend Lady Diana. After they introduced themselves to each other, Thomas, Lizzie, Mosley, and Lady Diana gathered in a room to talk about their business. After that, Thomas met with Jack Nelson who had just arrived in London. Jack told Thomas that he planned to buy a license to import alcohol because the alcohol industry in the US was really promising. When Thomas heard that, he told Jack that he had a good relationship with the Secretary of State Churchill. He said that the Secretary of State Churchill would help Jack to have his license if Jack agreed to work together with him. But if Jack refused to make a business deal with him, then Thomas would sell his opium to the Jews. Jack was interested with what Thomas said. He said that he would think about Thomas's offer first before he made any decision. At home, Lizzie saw Ruby sitting quietly in front of the fireplace. She found out that Ruby had a high fever again, so she called a doctor to check on her immediately. She also tried to call the Parliament to talk to Thomas, but Thomas was in the middle of a meeting. Lizzie had tried to call Thomas for several times when Thomas returned to his room. When Thomas was about to enter the room, he saw another vision of his past when he was serving in a war in France. As soon as Thomas arrived at home, Lizzie told him that their daughter Ruby was coughing up blood. Thomas was shocked when he heard that. He took Ruby to the hospital immediately. At the hospital, Ruby was raced to the emergency room by the doctors and the nurses there. Thomas tried to go to that room to accompany his daughter, but they didn't allow him. The doctor said that Thomas was not allowed to be near Ruby because coughing up blood was a contagious disease. Thomas thought that Ruby's illness was not an ordinary illness. He suspected that the illness was a curse for him because of what he had done in the past. Because of that, he came to see the gypsies to ask for their help to save Ruby. Since Thomas had arranged a meeting with Mosley and Jack on that day, he asked Ada to become his representative in that meeting. Ada agreed to help him. She went to Lady Diana's house because the meeting would be held there soon. At the beginning, Lady Diana disrespected and underestimated Ada, but after they had a little conversation, she found out the reason why Thomas sent Ada to become his representative in that meeting. Ada turned out to be as sharp and brilliant as Thomas. Before the meeting took place, Ada had even done some research on people who were going to attend that meeting. At the same time, Thomas arrived in the residence of the Lee family. He came to that place because he wanted to meet with Esme. Esme was John's ex-wife and a gypsy. Thomas accused Esme of putting a curse on his daughter, but after he saw Esme's reaction to his accusation, he realized that Esme was not the person who had put a curse on his daughter. As Thomas had told her, Ada gave invitations to Mosley, Jack, and everyone who attended that meeting. Thomas was going to give a further explanation about their business in the next meeting. When Thomas was about to leave the residence of the Lee family, Esme approached and stopped him. She asked Thomas to go a place with her. She said that Thomas might find an answer about the curse that happened to Ruby in that place. After Ada attended the meeting in Lady Diana's house, she went to the office of the Shelby Company. She wanted to find out about Thomas's business. She went through Thomas's notebook and found out that Thomas was hiding a large amount of opium in a warehouse in Liverpool. After Ada found out about that, she ordered Isaiah to visit and check that warehouse immediately. Ada heard that a leader of the General Trade Union called Hayden had organized a plan to steal the opium, so she asked Isaiah to meet Hayden and teach him a lesson. She also asked Isaiah to take Arthur with him. She thought that there must be a member of the Shelby family to keep a watch out for the workers in this mission. It was not like Arthur was busy with anything though. He had been locked in a safe in that office because they were afraid that he harmed anyone under the effect of the opium that he had been consumed. Isaiah, Arthur, and Arthur's subordinates finally arrived at the warehouse in Liverpool. They saw many workers sitting around and playing cards together in that warehouse. Arthur approached and asked a group of workers about Hayden's whereabouts, but those workers ignored him. They had no idea that the people who were talking to them were the Peaky blinders. Not long after that, Hayden came to that place. Arthur approached and confronted Hayden about the opium theft that he had committed. Hayden was not afraid of Arthur. Instead, he attacked Arthur by saying that Arthur had become addicted to opium. Isaiah was mad when he heard that. He beat up Hayden immediately. Arthur decided to ignore Hayden and leave that place. Thomas and Esme finally arrived in the mountains. They left their car there and continued their journey by using horses. They went to the top of the mountains and found a graveyard there. While they were walking, Esme reminded Thomas about the cursed sapphire stone that had killed Grace in the past. A few days after Grace died, Thomas gave that cursed sapphire stone to a wise old gypsy woman called Bethany Boswell. Bethany Boswell then gave that cursed sapphire stone to her younger sister called Evadne Barwell. Evadne made a necklace out of that cursed sapphire stone and gave it to her daughter. Not long after that, her daughter died because of a lung disease. She was only 7 years old when she died. After Thomas heard that story, he believed that Evadne was the person who had put a curse on his daughter. He was mad because all of this happened because of what he did in the past. Thomas planned to find the Barwell family to apologize to them and ask them to lift their curse, but Esme said that the Barwell family had moved far away and lived by the sea since a long time ago. Thomas asked Esme to help him to find the Barwell family. As a return, he promised to do everything that Esme asked him as long as his daughter could be saved. At night, Thomas returned to the hospital. As soon as Lizzie saw Thomas arriving there, she cried and told her husband that Ruby had passed away. Lizzie was very disappointed in Thomas. She regretted that Thomas was unable to stay in Ruby's side in the last moment of her life. In spite of that, right before Ruby breathed her last breath, Lizzie still told Ruby that Thomas really loved and cared for her. Thomas was shocked and speechless when he heard what Lizzie had just said. He was just standing there in the rain and crying over the death of his beloved daughter. The next day, Thomas and his family took Ruby's body to the funeral. This was inarguably a hard time for both Thomas and Lizzie. Thomas swore that he would take revenge on the Barwell family for the death of his daughter. Because of the help from Esme, Thomas finally found where the Barwell family lived. He came to the Barwell family's residence and killed Evadne and several soldiers immediately. After he took revenge on the Barwell family, he got back to his car and rewarded Esme with what she asked. Esme expressed her condolence for the death of Ruby. She said that she still had important information to share. Esme said that when Thomas lost one of his children, God sent him another child. Esme found out that Thomas got involved with a woman called Zelda in the past. Apparently, Zelda was pregnant with Thomas's child and gave birth to that child. That child had grown into a young man called Duke. This information was new for Thomas. He joined the military and fought in a war in France before he knew anything about Zelda and their child. Apparently, Zelda had died a few years ago. Duke lived by himself as a thief since then. After Thomas found out about that, he knew that he needed to make a decision. He needed to choose between acknowledging Duke as his child or pretending like he didn't know anything about this and keep abandoning Duke in the forest. At night, Jack Nelson, Laura, Mosley, and Lady Diana came to Thomas's residence to attend the scheduled meeting. During that meeting, they had discussion about the political ideology fascism and the business that they were going to do together. Each of them was going to have their own role in that business. Jack Nelson was going to be responsible for any correspondence they would make to the President of the U.S. Mosley was going to take an important role in the government in the UK. Laura was going to use his power and influence as the leading member of the IRA to persuade the members of the IRA to be sided with the fascists, and Thomas was going to take advantage of his good reputation. He planned to leave the political party and run as an independent candidate. After they agreed to make a business deal, Jack Nelson promised to provide the IRA with weapons and ammunition. He would ship those weapons from Germany to Boston. He also promised to help Thomas to import his merchandises. The next day, Thomas was typing all conversations that took place in the meeting last night with his typewriter. He planned to send those conversations to the Secretary of State Churchill. He believed that it could be seen as criminal evidence that would bring Jack and the others down. After that, Thomas received a telephone call from his subordinate. His subordinate told him that he saw Mosley coming out of Gina's apartment. Thomas used that information to blackmail Gina. He said that Jack Nelson would disown Gina if he found out that Gina had slept with Mosley. Gina was afraid with Thomas's threat. Thomas said that Gina had to do what he asked her to do or else he would reveal this information to Jack Nelson. Thomas asked Gina to accompany Mosley when Mosley had a meeting with a senior German government official in Berlin. He wanted to know about what Mosley and that senior government official were going to discuss and what decision that they were going to make in that meeting. The next morning, Thomas's personal physician named Dr. Halford came to Thomas's house. He visited Thomas because he wanted to tell Thomas about Thomas's X-ray result and diagnosis. He said that Thomas was not infected with the tuberculosis that Ruby had, but he revealed that Thomas had been diagnosed with tuberculoma that occurred in his brain. This explained why Thomas had been having headaches, seizures, and hallucinations all this time. Dr. Halford said that tuberculoma was not a contagious disease, but sadly, it couldn't be cured by any treatment. He predicted that Thomas had only 18 months to live. When Thomas heard that, he remembered about what Polly Gray said in his dream. Polly said that Michael and Thomas were going to fight each other and one of them was going to die. Thomas wanted to keep this information from his family. He planned to go to a quiet and faraway place to isolate himself until he died because of the illness, but before that, he intended to finish his last business first. After that, Thomas visited a store which was selling opium in Chinatown. He ordered the store owner to surrender all opium that he owned to him. He also told him not to sell or buy any opium in that area. He threatened to blow up that store with dynamite if the store owner still dared to sell opium in that area. After Thomas left that store, the wife of the store owner suspected that the dynamite that Thomas brought with him was a fake dynamite. But suddenly, Thomas did this in front of their store. Thomas Shelby was a man who always kept his word. That was why he was highly respected and respected by many people. After that, Thomas gathered the Shelby family in a room. He wanted to tell them about some important things. The first thing that he announced was the marriage of Finn and a woman called Mary. After that, he introduced Duke to his family. He said that Duke was his own son. Everybody was surprised when Duke was being introduced to them, especially Lizzie. Then, Thomas asked Arthur to watch over Duke and show and teach him about how the Peaky Blinders worked. At night, Arthur, Finn, Billy, and Duke met with a referee who refused their request to manipulate the football match. The referee said that he didn't want to cheat in the football game no matter how much the Peaky Blinders paid him. Arthur was angry because of that. He told the referee to call the police and report the Peaky Blinders to them. As Arthur had expected, the police refused to be sided with that referee because the Peaky Blinders had bribed them before the football match began. After that, Arthur ordered Billy to kill that referee immediately. Billy refused his order right away, but Arthur forced him into doing it. Duke observed them quietly. He was learning about how the Peaky Blinders worked. He thought that the Peaky Blinders worked in a very dirty and unfair way, so he decided to leave that room immediately. Billy got frustrated because he had killed a human being for the first time. He was trying to calm himself in a bathhouse. Suddenly, Jack Nelson came and approached him. He came there to force Billy to spy on the Peaky Blinders. He planned to kill Thomas Shelby with his own hands, and in order to do that, he needed Billy to help him. Billy finally agreed to work for Jack Nelson because he was afraid that Jack Nelson killed him. At the same time, Linda came to the Garrison pub. Arthur was surprised when he saw Linda there. He kneeled down in front of Linda immediately. He apologized for everything that he had done in the past. He genuinely asked Linda to help him to change into a better person. The next day, Charlie brought Duke to Thomas. He told Thomas that Duke had stolen a car and a fair amount of money from the Peaky Blinders. Thomas was disappointed with Duke when he heard that. He didn't mind if Duke stole from other people, but it would be a different story if Duke stole from him. Because of that, Thomas gave a sum of money to Duke. He offered him a choice. He told Duke to choose between kept working as a thief or start working in the horse stable that was owned by the Peaky Blinders. After Duke heard what his father said, he decided to keep working there. At home, Lizzie was curious with the medicine that had been consumed by Thomas. Thomas decided to keep his illness from his wife. He lied that the medicine that he consumed was only a painkiller. That night, Thomas and Lizzie were going to have a meeting with Jack Nelson. In that meeting, Thomas said that he was going to visit Canada soon because he wanted to take his payout. The money that he would receive was $5 million. Mosley and Lady Diana weren't invited by Thomas to that meeting, but suddenly they came to Thomas's house and joined Thomas, Lizzie, and Jack Nelson in that meeting. They said that they came there because they wanted to say goodbye to Jack Nelson. They knew that Jack was going to return to the US soon. While they were having conversation, suddenly Lady Diana talked about her relationship with Thomas. Lizzie was hurt and uncomfortable with what Lady Diana said, so she decided to leave that meeting immediately. After Lizzie left, Mosley said that Lizzie was not good enough to become Thomas's wife. Thomas was mad because Mosley and Lady Diana kept disrespecting his wife, so he got up from his chair and said that Lizzie was indeed not good enough to become a wife of a bad man like him who was surrounded by bad people like Mosley and Lady Diana. At the same time, Michael was finally released from the prison. Because he had been freed now, he intended to execute his plan to kill Thomas Shelby with his own hands soon. The next day, Lizzie bade her farewell to Thomas. She said that she couldn't bear the pain of being Thomas's wife anymore. Charles found out that Lizzie was going to leave Thomas and their residence. He asked Lizzie to take him with her, even though Lizzie was only his stepmother. He thought that Lizzie loved him more than his own father loved him. When Thomas heard that, he allowed Lizzie and Charles to leave. He said that he would prepare a new house for them to live. He didn't mind with Lizzie and Charles's decision. He had planned to destroy their mansion and go to a faraway place to isolate himself because he was going to die soon. Charlie took Duke to an armory that was owned by the Peaky Blinders and showed him around. Because Duke was a son of Thomas Shelby, he needed to prepare himself to become a gangster and the next leader of the Peaky Blinders. As the requirement to become a gangster, Charlie interviewed Duke with some questions. He asked Duke if Duke had killed someone before. Surprisingly, Duke said that he had killed a nurse who refused to treat his mother just because his mother was a gypsy woman. Thomas came to his room in the office. He was surprised when he saw Arthur waiting for him there. Apparently, Arthur had found and seen the picture of Thomas's X-ray result. He was getting emotional when he found out that Thomas was going to die soon. Thomas told Arthur that after he had done his last business, he would go to a quiet and faraway place to isolate himself. He planned to leave all his properties and money to the Shelby family. He asked Arthur to keep the information about Thomas's illness from anyone, especially the Shelby family, because he didn't want to make them worry. After that, Thomas gathered all members of the Peaky Blinders in the Garrison pub. In that meeting, Thomas told them that he was going to go to Canada to take the payout for their selling of opium. He planned to go to Canada alone because Johnny Dogs was going to accompany him in Canada. He asked the Peaky Blinders to empty his house while he was gone because he was going to destroy that house. Michael arrived in the Miquelon Island. He brought a mysterious black bag with him. He carried that bag very carefully because that bag contained a time bomb. Apparently, Michael planned to kill Thomas by using that bomb. He chose to use a bomb because he remembered that his mother said that Thomas Shelby couldn't get killed by bullets. At the same time, the members of the Peaky Blinders surrounded and attacked Billy in Thomas's house. Apparently, they had found out that Billy had betrayed Thomas and them. Only Finn who didn't know about that. Because Finn had no idea about what was happening, he refused to kill Billy. Duke was impatient with that situation, so he took over and killed Billy immediately.
You are no longer a member of this Shelby family.
In the same evening, Laura and her group were going to execute their plan to kill Arthur. After Laura and her group found out that Arthur was in the Garrison pub, they came to that pub immediately, but when they went inside of that pub, they didn't find Arthur there. They only saw Charlie. Apparently, Arthur and the Peaky Blinders had prepared themselves because they had predicted about that attack. Laura was surprised that the Peaky Blinders found out about their plan. She ordered her subordinates to attack Arthur right away. They managed to shoot Arthur in the wrist. Not long after that, Jeremiah came and leaked a poison gas in that place. Laura and her subordinates finally died because of that poison gas. Thomas went to the Miquelon Island to have a meeting with Michael. Michael asked Thomas to go to another place with him by using his car to check some opium. When they were about to get inside of that car, Michael said that he left his wallet in the pub. Not long after that, something like this happened. Michael came out of the pub. He was shocked when he found out that Thomas was still alive. Apparently, Thomas had found out that Michael was going to kill him with a time bomb in that place. He ordered Johnny Dogs to move that time bomb to Jack's subordinate's car. Thomas was disappointed and furious with Michael when he found out about that. Because of that, he decided to kill Michael right away.
Your lethal hand is always on our shoulders.
I have no limitations.
After that, Thomas got back to the pub. Alfie Solomons showed up there and said that he was willing to help Thomas in Thomas's next mission. When Thomas returned to Birmingham, he destroyed his house like he had planned before. Before Thomas went to a quiet and faraway place to isolate himself, he gathered his family in a place. In that family gathering, Thomas bade his farewell to his family. He said that it was the time for him to take a break from his work and everything that had occupied his mind all this time. He asked his family to take care of the Shelby Company well. 1 month later, Thomas had a dream when he was sleeping alone in his place. In that dream, he saw his daughter Ruby running toward him. Ruby asked Thomas not to take his own life because she found out that Thomas was not dying. Thomas saw a picture of the wedding of Mosley and Lady Diana on a newspaper. In that picture, he saw Dr. Halford attending that wedding. Because of that, Thomas realized that Dr. Halford had been working together with Mosley to terrorize and put pressures on him all this time. Dr. Halford tried to manipulate Thomas psychologically and mislead him into taking his own life. It was easy for Thomas to kill Dr. Halford right away, but he decided not to kill him. It was clear that Thomas Shelby was going to return to the Peaky Blinders and get back what he deserved.